My husband said, "My ex is joining us for Halloween." That night, I served more than just dinner. I still remember that Halloween night, the one that started with laughter that wasn't mine. I had spent the entire day preparing dinner, moving slower than I used to but steady enough to keep the rhythm of a home no one seemed to notice anymore. The smell of roasted pumpkin filled the kitchen, though it no longer reminded anyone of comfort. My hands were rough now, spotted with time, but they still knew how to cook the dishes that once made my family proud. Tonight, though, the air was colder, heavier, and even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to mock me. Ricardo, my son, stood in the doorway with his glass of wine, smirking like he owned the place. "You should be grateful Dad didn't leave you years ago," he said, tilting his head as if the cruelty in his words was some kind of joke. The guests, his friends, laughed softly, pretending not to notice my silence. But silence had been my armor for years, so I wore it again. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I turned back to the oven, pretending not to hear. Pretending had become second nature in this house. Then I heard the front door open and the sound of a woman's heels on the marble floor. The laughter in the living room swelled. When I stepped into the doorway, I saw David, my husband, standing tall, proud, with his arm wrapped around a woman in a violet dress. The world around me blurred for a second. I knew that posture, that smirk, that arrogance. But what tore through me was not David. It was her. "Karen?" I said, almost a whisper, but it sliced through the noise like glass. She smiled, my friend of 50 years, the woman who once held my hand through childbirth, through grief, through every storm of my life. She looked straight into my eyes, her lipstick dark as blood. "Yes, Martha," she said, her voice sugar-coated venom. I took a step back. "Karen, you're my best friend. How could you do this to me?" David chuckled, swirling his drink. "Don't make a scene, Martha. Let's be honest this Halloween. Karen's joining us." The guests laughed again, as if betrayal were a show and I was the unwanted extra. Karen turned to them, her tone sharp enough to cut through bone. "So what?" she said. And then, with that little smirk that used to mean conspiracy between us, she added, "Even an old witch like you doesn't deserve a broom." Gasps, chuckles, and a few cruel laughs rolled through the room. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for me to break. I didn't. I looked straight at her. For a split second, something flickered in her eyes, something no one else could see. I nodded, barely, almost imperceptibly. Karen returned the gesture with a tiny tilt of her head. They thought she was mocking me, but only she and I knew the truth. That phrase, "the broom," was the signal. It meant the plan had begun. Let them laugh. Let them think the witch had finally lost her dignity. They had no idea that the spell had already been cast. I was 34 the day I stopped believing the world was safe. It was late autumn in New York, and I was driving home from a charity event, pearls around my neck, a soft scarf my father once gave me, the scent of rain in the air. My family's name had been printed on every building fund, every donation list, every gala invitation. I carried the pride of generations on my shoulders, too proud to notice the black car that had been following me for miles. When they grabbed me, I thought I would die. The sack over my head, the ropes on my wrists, the cold of a basement floor, I remember it all. I prayed, not for rescue, but for forgiveness, for all the people I had passed without seeing, the ones who slept under bridges while I attended charity dinners pretending to help them. And then there was a man. He kicked open the basement door, coughing from the dust, yelling that he had seen me taken. He untied me, covered me with his coat, and called me ma'am like I was some lost child he had found in the dark. He said his name was David, a homeless man who lived near the river. The police called him a hero. Reporters called him a miracle. I called him my savior. He didn't want money, he said. He refused the checks my lawyer tried to send. He only asked if he could work at the garden behind my building, trimming the roses that no one else cared for. I said yes, grateful, blind. Every day I brought him coffee, and every day he told me stories about sleeping on benches, about hunger, about how kindness was a kind of faith. I believed every word. When the nightmares came, he was the only one who could quiet them. He spoke softly, made me laugh again, reminded me what warmth felt like. I told myself that God had sent him to me because I needed to learn humility. When my father died a year later, David was there, holding my hand at the funeral when no one else knew what to say. By the end of that winter, I was in love. He didn't fit the world I came from, and that thrilled me. My friends whispered, my relatives begged me to reconsider. Even Karen, my dearest friend, sat across from me at the cafe one evening, her hands trembling around her teacup. "Keep him close," she said quietly, "but keep your eyes open." I laughed. "You think he wants my money?" She didn't laugh back. "I think everyone wants something. But love is a stubborn blindness. I married him without a prenup, without a second thought, under a sky so bright it almost hurt to look at. The newspapers called it a fairy tale, the wealthy heiress and the man who saved her life. For a while, it even felt like one. He brought life into my empty house. He fixed doors, learned to cook, joked that he'd gone from alleyways to marble floors. I thought his jokes were humility. They were warnings I refused to hear. When he touched my hand, I felt safe. When he said, "I'll take care of you," I didn't hear the echo of something darker hiding in the promise. Years later, I would learn the truth, the ransom demand that never reached the police, the 2 kidnappers who vanished without trial, the unexplained withdrawals from my charity's accounts. But back then, I was still the woman who believed that love could erase the past. Sometimes, when David fell asleep beside me, I would trace the scar above his eyebrow, wondering what kind of pain had carved it there. He said it came from the night he rescued me. When one of the kidnappers hit him with a pipe, I kissed the scar like it was sacred. I didn't know then that the mark had come from something else entirely, a fight long before me, part of the life he had carefully rewritten. In the early years, he would watch me sign checks, file papers, and smile in that quiet way of his. "You're too trusting," he would say, and I would laugh. "Not with you," I'd reply. I should have listened. Love, when built on a lie, feels like a house without a foundation, beautiful from afar, doomed from the first storm. I told myself I had found a man who saw beyond my fortune. In truth, I had invited the storm inside. 15 years is a long time to watch a man learn the shape of your keys. It began with little things: David taking the mail before I reached the box, helping with online bill payments, suggesting we consolidate accounts to make retirement simple. I let him, the way rain teaches stone to yield, not because I was weak, but because trust is a habit that hardens if you keep feeding it. By the time I woke to what he was doing, most of the logins belonged to him, and the house I had bought with my father's blessing felt like it was slowly changing its last name. He wanted the deed first. "Liability," he said, tapping a pen against a folder he would not let me touch. "If something happens to you, probate will eat us alive. Put both names. It's sensible." When I hesitated, he smiled the way a doctor smiles before a painful procedure. "I will take care of everything." That phrase once meant safety. Now it sounded like a lock clicking shut. Ricardo made it worse. My son had learned to admire certainty, and David wore certainty like a tailored suit. "Dad deserves happiness, Mom," he told me in the kitchen, rinsing a whiskey glass he was too young to love so much. "Karen brings out the real man in him." I searched his face for the boy who used to hide dandelions in his pockets for me. All I saw was a man who thought I was the past tense of love. I began taking inventory, not of furniture or jewels, but of pressures. How often David mentioned joint signatures, which banker he preferred, what time Ricardo came home from drinks with clients, and whether he looked at me or through me. I wrote it all in a small black notebook my father had given me when I was 12, the one with a loose elastic and paper soft from years of lists. No one noticed the notebook because no one believed I had anything left to write. The night I stopped pretending landed on me like an uninvited guest. I had fallen asleep in the reading room, glasses still on, a blanket over my knees, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the brittle tick of the mantel clock. I woke to David's voice behind the door of his study, low and rehearsed, and to the tinny echo that meant he had someone on speaker. I did not move. The floorboards in that hallway tell stories. I had learned which plank never betrayed me. After Halloween she will sign, he said. Paper rustled. We keep the theater through the holiday. She likes the theater. Sentimental people sign faster when they are told they are being honored. A woman answered. Calm, practiced, intimate, Karen. Hearing her voice did not break me. It clarified me, the way a bell clarifies silence. You take the shares, David continued. I keep the house. He paused as if admiring the neatness of the sentence. Clean exit. They ended the call with a long exhale David used to save for me. When the light under the door went dark, I slipped back to the reading room and stared at the ceiling until morning taught me where to begin. I did not confront him. That would have satisfied his timetable, not mine. Instead, I learned to collect. First the emails. He had saved every helpful note from the bank in a folder called Estate. I forwarded them to an account he did not know I owned, the one my accountant had set up years ago for redundancy, and I had forgotten. Until one evening, years later, I stumbled upon it while sorting through old tax files. I almost deleted it, not knowing it would someday save me. Then the statements. The charity fund I managed bore withdrawals the board had never approved. I scanned them all, dates, amounts, the quiet initials of the clerk who processed them. I placed the scans on a flash drive shaped like a silver pen and kept it in a jar of dried rosemary no one but me ever opened. I began carrying my phone in an apron pocket and turned on the voice memo app as naturally as I folded dish towels. People confess themselves in kitchens. David liked to rehearse speeches about prudence and legacy while I chopped herbs. I let the device listen. Ricardo liked to talk deals and futures and clean hands. He did not look down to see the red dot lit against the cotton. When David scheduled a meeting with a notary to go over a few updates, I went first, alone, to the same office and asked the receptionist to print me the forms most commonly used to add a spouse to a deed and to transfer restricted shares. I read them in the cafe across the street, circling phrases, underlining sections that required my initials. I learned the difference between convenience and consent. At the bank, I asked to see the branch manager, a woman with tired eyes and a mother's patience. I am not changing anything today, I told her, but if someone asks you to move large sums from the Martha H. accounts in the next month, I would like a phone call first. From you. To me. Even if he carries my ring. She studied my face for the kind of bruises you can photograph, and finding none, nodded at the kind you cannot. We exchanged numbers, written on cardstock, that slid into my notebook like a promise. Ricardo slipped one afternoon. He left his tablet on the dining table while he took a call on the terrace, laughing at something mean in a way that made me miss my son and pity the man wearing him. The tablet had our family cloud account logged in. I do not know what impulse moved my hand, but suddenly I was looking at a message thread named Partners. The names were unfamiliar, except for David's, shortened to D.R. They talked in shorthand about timelines and liquidity, about getting the old signature before the announcement. Ricardo wrote, "She's soft, she will fold. Worst case, she trips first." I photographed it with my phone before my heart could tell me to stop. I made copies of my will and stored them in two places David never entered. The church safe, where Father Miguel kept baptismal records, and a safe deposit box registered under my maiden name at a bank David considered beneath him. I asked an old friend, a retired detective whose daughter I had once coached through piano recitals, to recommend a security installer who valued discretion more than branding. By week's end, a camera sat like a black button in the crown molding of the living room, another in the hall by the study, and one just outside the front door under the awning. The feeds uploaded to that same forgotten email, time-stamped and steady. It is difficult to describe the discipline of waiting for a man you once loved to finish spelling out his betrayal. Every hour offered me the temptation to scream. Instead, I practiced small obediences to the stove, to the laundry, to the old hydrangea bush in the yard that needed trimming before frost. It soothed me to care for things that did not know how to lie. Karen came by twice that month. She stood on the porch with chrysanthemums and a face arranged for pity, and I let her in as if I were still the woman who told her everything. She walked my halls, commenting on paint colors, on the light in the east foyer, on how the study would make a lovely reading room for a guest. She said it kindly, the way a realtor softens a blow. When she hugged me at the door, I smelled the same perfume from my wedding day and wondered if she wore it to measure the distance between the woman I had been and the woman I had become. I did not confront her either. There would be time for truth, and truth deserves a stage better than a doormat. By the end of that week, I had a map. Recordings of David's assurances and Ricardo's contempt, screenshots of plans that treated me like paperwork, financial records that bled where trust had been cut. I labeled each file with a date and a single-word deed, shares, call, partners, so that if I had to hand the story to a stranger, it would tell itself without me. I was afraid, but the fear was clean now. It had edges. It could be held. On Saturday, David set his phone face down on the counter, a habit he had adopted once he understood that secrets are shy. The screen lit up anyway. A calendar alert slid across the glass, Notary November 1. He caught me looking and smiled. "Do not worry," he said, almost tender. "By next month, everything will be simple." I smiled back, almost tender. By next month, everything would be clear. I asked Karen to meet me in the greenhouse. It was the only place left in the house that still smelled like life, the only room David never entered because the air was too humid for his cologne. The rain had just started. Drops beat the glass roof in thin, frantic rhythms. When she walked in, she looked exactly as she always had: perfect hair, tasteful jewelry, the calm confidence of a woman who had already judged you before sitting down. I didn't waste time on pretense. "How long?" I asked. My voice was steady, almost gentle. "How long have you known?" Karen's eyes flickered toward the window. "Known what?" she said, but her fingers trembled when she set her purse on the table. I slid a printed still frame across the glass between us, a grainy image from one of the recordings, David on the phone with her, his hand resting on the very desk where my father used to sign contracts. "You were careful," I said, "just not careful enough." For a moment, I thought she might lie. Then she exhaled and reached into her purse. What she pulled out wasn't an excuse, but an old photograph. David, 30 years younger, arm draped around her shoulders, both of them smiling with the ease of people who hadn't yet learned to hide their hunger. She tapped her nail on the glossy paper, right beneath his brow. "The mole," she said quietly, under his right eyebrow. He had it removed, or thought he did. The surgeon told him it would fade. It never did. She looked up at me. That's how I knew. I felt the weight of it settle between us like a stone. "You recognized him the first time I brought him to dinner." She nodded. "I told myself I was wrong. I told myself I had been stupid once, that he couldn't have found me again through you. But then I saw the way he watched your signature, not your smile, and I knew." The air tightened. I wanted to shout, to ask why she hadn't warned me, why she had let me build a life on the quicksand of her silence. She must have seen the thought forming because she raised her hand. "Don't," she said. "You think I'm proud of it? He took everything from me 30 years ago. My gallery, my savings, my name. I built myself back from ashes. When he reappeared, I froze. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd think I was jealous, or mad, or both. And then I saw what he was doing to you, and I couldn't decide whether to scream or to wait. I stood there, hearing the rain sharpen. So which did you choose?" "I waited too long," she said. "And now I'm done waiting." We stared at each other, two women who had been taught that silence was grace, realizing too late it had only ever protected the wrong people. I poured us tea, my hands steady again. "He plans to make me sign the papers after Halloween," I said. "He thinks sentimentality makes me weak." Karen gave a bitter smile. "It makes you dangerous. He never learned the difference." That was when the plan began to form, not revenge, not yet, but something colder, sharper. I pulled the documents from my folder, property deeds, stock certificates, trust forms. "Every piece he wants," I said. He's been counting them like coins. Karen studied them, her old shrewdness flickering back to life. You transfer the assets now, she said slowly, to someone he trusts, someone already in his pocket. He won't see it as loss, just temporary movement. I looked at her. And that someone is you. Her eyes widened. You trust me? I almost laughed. No, but I trust that you hate him enough. Something in her posture softened, the pride melting just a little. The foundation, she said after a moment. We'll use it. Women Who Rise. I registered it years ago for grants. It's clean, and no one ever checked who funds it. Perfect, I said. You'll hold the title, publicly. If he tries to move the money, the system locks him out. Karen leaned back, the old calculating gleam in her eyes. And what do I tell him? Tell him you're playing both sides, that you want your cut. He'll believe it. He always believes a woman's loyalty ends where her profit begins. She laughed once, harshly. And what about you, Martha? What do you get out of this? I met her gaze. A house where my name still means something, and a story where he finally learns that women talk to each other. We sat in silence, letting the idea take shape. By the time the teapot was empty, it had teeth. Karen would flirt her way back into his trust, pretend to conspire, and slip him a contract disguised as a financial declaration, something he'd sign without reading because he always thought he was the smartest person in any room. In truth, it would be a formal renunciation of ownership. The clause was legal, airtight, and irreversible once filed. I would move the deeds and shares into the foundation's name under the guise of charity restructuring. Everything David believed he owned would, by the time he noticed, already belong to something he couldn't touch. And the signal? Karen asked, her tone lighter now, as if the fear had found a place to sit. The broom, I said. She frowned. Why that? Because that's what he calls me behind my back, I replied. An old witch. Let him laugh. When you say those words, everyone will think you're mocking me. Only we will know you're sweeping him out of his own house. For the first time that night, Karen smiled like she used to, tired, but genuine. Then the broom it is. When she left, the storm had quieted. I stood among the orchids, listening to the water dripping from the glass panes. Betrayal had brought us together, but something else was beginning to root beneath it, a fierce, silent alliance between women who had been made to believe that forgiveness was our duty. By morning, the papers were signed. The assets moved quietly through accounts and into the foundation's custody. The lawyer I had trusted for years confirmed the transfers with a single word: done. David spent that day humming to himself, planning the party he thought would end my life as he knew it. I watched him, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Outside, the October wind was howling. It almost sounded like laughter mine. The night of the Halloween party began the way every humiliation does, under the disguise of celebration. I had laid out the same dishes I'd cooked for 40 years, every plate familiar, every smell chosen to keep the peace. The house glowed with orange lights and hollow laughter. Ricardo's friends mingled with David's business partners, people who called me darling out of habit, not affection. They didn't know they were standing in the scene of their host's last performance. David entered the room, in his tailored black suit, glass of scotch in hand, the picture of charm and control. He kissed Karen on the cheek, an exaggerated, public gesture meant to provoke. She played along beautifully, smiling as if she were proud to be wearing another woman's life. He tapped his glass for silence. "Everyone," he said, "let's call this what it is, Martha's retirement party." Laughter rippled around the table, polite and poisonous. I smiled back. "Retirement?" I said softly. "From what?" "From pretending," he said, still smiling. "From this marriage, from running things that don't need running. It's time for you to rest." He raised his glass toward Karen, and for new energy to take over. Karen leaned against his arm, the perfect accomplice. "Even an old witch like you doesn't deserve a broom," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. The laughter that followed was sharp and nervous, but I caught the small flicker in her eyes. The cue, the broom. I nodded once, just enough for her to see. My heart didn't race, it slowed. Karen's smirk softened for half a breath before she turned back to the guests. "Kidding," she said lightly. "Just Halloween humor." David poured himself another drink, reveling in the attention. "You all think I'm cruel," he said, raising his glass again. "But this woman has served me dinner for 40 years. I'm only giving her what she's earned, a long, quiet rest." I tilted my head. "You always did enjoy speeches, David. I thought maybe tonight we could listen to one of yours together." He blinked, half amused. "Another toast?" "No," I said. "A recording." The lights dimmed as the television behind him flickered on. For a moment there was confusion, then the room filled with his voice, captured in the same smooth tone he used for investors. "After Halloween, she'll sign. She keeps the shares, I keep the house. Clean exit." Gasps cut through the room. On screen, his image sat in our study, hand over a document. Then came the next clip. "Karen's useful. She thinks she's in control, but she's not. 2 birds, 1 deed." Every eye turned toward him, his face drained of color. Karen's hand fell from his arm. Ricardo pushed away from the table, his chair scraping the floor. "That's not what he meant," he stammered, voice cracking. "This is taken out of context." The room had gone utterly still. The only sound was the soft hiss of the television speakers as the final clip played David's laugh, cruel and easy. "She's old, she's tired, I'll sign for her if I have to. By the time she realizes, the papers will be filed." Someone dropped a fork. A woman near the end of the table whispered, "Oh my God." David tried to recover, his voice pitching higher. This is edited. She's manipulating you all." Karen stepped back, folding her arms. Her face was calm now, no longer acting. "You did that well enough yourself," she said quietly. Ricardo's face twisted. "Mom, why would you do this? You're humiliating him, humiliating us." I looked at my son, the same boy who used to hold my hand at night when storms frightened him. "No, Ricardo," I said softly. "I'm reminding you what a storm really looks like." No one moved. The television screen froze on David's face, mid-sentence, his mouth open as if caught between confidence and fear. I stood, the air around me crisp with something close to peace. "Enjoy your dinner," I said to the guests, who still didn't know whether to leave or applaud. "There's more to come." And then I turned toward the hallway, where the cameras were still rolling, where every word, every breath, every desperate denial was about to write the final chapter of the man who thought he owned my life. David's voice cracked first, the way a mask splits before it falls. "You think this little circus will save you?" he shouted, sweeping a tray of glasses from the table. Shards of crystal scattered across the floor. "Get out of my house, you rotting witch!" The guests froze. Karen stepped back, her face pale, her hand inching toward the phone in her clutch. Ricardo moved to his father's side, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the door like he was calculating the distance between disgrace and escape. I stood still. I had expected fury. I had prepared for it. What I hadn't expected was how small David looked when the truth finally stripped him bare. "It's not your house, David," I said quietly. It never was. Something broke in him at that. He lunged forward, his hand locking around my arm. "You think you can humiliate me in front of them?" His breath smelled of whiskey and panic. "You think you can ruin everything?" The world tilted. He pushed me toward the open doorway, the autumn air slicing through the noise. For one dizzy second I saw the steps, the marble edge glinting under the porch light, and I understood. This was never about money. This was about erasing the only witness to his lies. Karen screamed. The crowd shouted. But before I could fall, another hand caught me firm, sure, deliberate. Enough. It was Mr. Levine, my lawyer, stepping out from behind the doorway where he had been standing since the start of the evening. He steadied me, then turned to David. "You just attempted to push your wife down the stairs," he said, his voice sharp as glass. "And unfortunately for you, the cameras recorded every second of it. We submitted the footage earlier today under a sealed affidavit, awaiting this moment." David blinked, confused, furious. What cameras? Mr. Levine pointed to the molding above the door frame. The ones you never noticed because you never looked up unless it was at yourself. Then came the sound, a heavy thud of boots at the front entrance, the unmistakable command of authority. 2 officers stepped into the room, their badges glinting under the chandelier. "Mr. David Reynolds?" one said. "We have a warrant for your arrest." David spun, wild-eyed. "You can't be serious. This is my home." "Correction," Mr. Levine interrupted. "This property and all its holdings are now under the Women Who Rise Foundation, filed and approved 2 weeks ago, and as of 10 minutes ago, you're trespassing." Ricardo grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, stop talking. We can fix this." But the second officer was already reading him his rights. "Ricardo Reynolds, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and for participating in a planned act of bodily harm against your mother." Ricardo's face went white. "That's insane. I never—" Mr. Levine pulled a small recorder from his pocket. "If she accidentally falls down the stairs, what's the harm?" Ricardo's own voice filled the room. "We'd inherit everything anyway." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. David tried one last performance. "Martha, think. You can't do this. I built this life for us." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You built a lie around us. And I just took the walls down." The handcuffs clicked shut. Karen stood by the fireplace, tears streaming silently down her face, not from pity, but release. The officers led them out through the doorway, past the shattered glass. The whispers, the cell phones capturing the spectacle of 2 men realizing too late that control had never belonged to them. As they reached the porch, David turned back one final time, voice shaking. "You planned this, you and her." I met his eyes. "Yes," I said, "we did. Because women talk, David. We always have. You just never listened." The door closed behind them. The room was silent except for the faint echo of their footsteps and the soft hum of the camera shutting off. I looked around at the stunned faces of our guests. "Please," I said, smoothing the sleeve of my blouse. "Don't let the food go to waste. The devil's already had his dinner." And then I walked toward the kitchen, each step steady, knowing that the broom had done its work. The house, at last, was clean. When the police cars finally pulled away, the house exhaled. The guests left in small, guilty clusters, murmuring apologies they didn't mean, eyes averted as if witnessing my humiliation instead of my deliverance. The chandelier still burned above the dining table, its light reflecting off half-empty glasses and spilled wine. It looked like a battlefield disguised as a celebration. I started cleaning. It wasn't duty, it was instinct. The sponge against porcelain, the steady rhythm of water running, gave my hands something to do while my mind tried to make sense of quiet. Each plate I washed carried a ghost of laughter that no longer stung. I stacked them gently, not because they were delicate, but because I no longer was. The night outside was clear. Through the window, I could see the police lights fading down the street, blue and red disappearing into the distance like the last traces of a storm. Somewhere in another part of the city, David and Ricardo were sitting in the back of a cruiser, silent, handcuffed, already rewriting the story in their heads. Men like them always did. I wiped down the counter, turned off the faucet, and went to the study. The room smelled of old paper and betrayal. The safe behind the bookshelf opened with a soft click. Inside lay a small wooden box that had once held my wedding band, Ricardo's baby bracelet, and a thin gold ring my mother had worn until the day she died. I sat down and opened it. The rings caught the light, dull but alive. David's was heavy, masculine, engraved with initials that meant nothing now. I held it in my palm for a long time before setting it aside. Ricardo's bracelet, tiny and perfect, still had the faint scratch from when he'd chewed on it as a baby. I remembered how I used to believe love could outlast cruelty. I placed the bracelet beside his father's ring. Then there was mine. Simple gold, no diamonds, no inscription, just a circle that had survived every season of my life. I slipped it onto my finger. It was loose now. Age had thinned me, but it still fit enough to stay. I whispered to the empty room. I am not an antique. I am the memory no one can steal. The words felt heavier than grief, lighter than freedom. I closed the box and pushed it back into the safe, locking it for the last time. In the hallway, the floor creaked under my steps. The air was cooler. Somewhere outside, a wind chime rang softly. I passed the mirror by the staircase and paused. For years I had avoided it, afraid of seeing the woman David said. I had become tired, invisible, obsolete. But tonight, the face staring back at me looked steady, sharp, unbroken. The lines were still there, but they told a story of endurance, not decay. On the table lay the leftover decorations, black candles half melted, a plastic pumpkin, a broom Karen had left leaning by the door. I picked it up, brushing my fingers over the worn wood. It made me smile. In the kitchen, the clock struck midnight. I made tea, the way I used to before the noise began to fill our lives. The cup trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from release. When you survive long enough to reclaim your silence, it sounds like peace. I carried the tea to the porch. The night air was sharp, the stars impossibly bright. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the house settle, to the echo of everything that had finally ended. Somewhere inside, my phone buzzed a message from Karen. It's done. Rest. I typed back. Not rest. Begin. I set the phone down, took one slow breath, and let the steam from my cup blur the edges of the world. The house behind me no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a witness. Some witnesses stay silent. This one would keep my story long after I was gone. A month later, I woke to the sound of church bells instead of sirens. Rome looked softer in the morning, all gold and white, like the city had forgiven itself overnight. The air smelled of coffee and wet stone. Karen and I sat on the balcony of a small hotel near Piazza Navona, two old women wrapped in shawls, pretending we were tourists, not survivors. She poured tea into delicate porcelain cups, her movements slower now but graceful as ever. You realize we actually did it, she said, almost laughing. Did what? I asked. Outlived them. I smiled. The television inside murmured the morning news in Italian, the anchor's voice calm and factual. David Reynolds and Ricardo Reynolds were sentenced today to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted homicide. The translation scrolled across the bottom of the screen in English. There was a photo of David, older, defeated, wearing the orange of his own downfall. Karen turned down the volume. 18 years, she said softly. They'll hate each other by year 2. They already did, I replied. They just hadn't admitted it yet. For a while, we sipped our tea in silence, the way people do when words aren't big enough to hold what they've been through. The breeze carried the smell of baked bread from the cafe below, the same kind of scent that used to fill my kitchen back home. Only now, it didn't ache. I used to dream of seeing this city, I said. I just thought I'd come here younger, with a husband instead of a history. Karen looked at me, her eyes full of something gentler than pity. You came with yourself, she said. That's better. We laughed, not loudly, but freely. The waiter passed by and left 2 croissants without asking, as if he could tell this was a table where quiet things had finally turned into peace. Then the knock came. 3 soft taps on the hotel door, hesitant. Karen frowned. You expecting anyone? I wasn't. When I opened it, a small girl stood in the hallway, 12, maybe 13, her dark hair tied back with a ribbon too bright for her tired eyes. She held a folded envelope against her chest like it was armor. Are you Mrs. Martha? She asked in a careful voice. Yes, I said. Come in, sweetheart. She stepped inside, clutching the letter. My name's Ellie, she said. I'm part of the Women Who Rise program. They said you wrote me. I nodded, suddenly remembering. After the trial, I'd signed dozens of letters, mentorship offers, scholarship applications, sponsorships for girls who had no one left to tell them they mattered. I hadn't expected any of them to find me. Ellie's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. My handwriting stared back at me, a line I had written late one night in New York. You are not broken. You are waiting to be found by your own courage. She looked up. When I got this, I was going to do something bad, she whispered. But then I read it again, and I thought, maybe I could wait one more day, and then one more after that. Karen pressed her hand to her mouth. I reached for Ellie's fingers. They were cold and small and very real. I'm glad you waited, I said. Waiting is how the strong survive. She blinked fast. They told me you helped start the program, the one that pays for girls like me to go to school. I wanted to say thank you. I smiled. Then say it by living the kind of life they said you couldn't. Ellie nodded, her eyes steady now. I want to see the world someday, she said. All of it. Karen laughed softly. Then you found the right grandmothers. Outside, the bells began again, louder this time, carrying through the streets like a promise. I packed the last of our things while Karen showed Ellie the postcards we'd collected. Florence, Venice, Paris, next on the list. When we reached the train station later that afternoon, the sky was streaked with orange and rose. The platform smelled of metal and motion. Ellie held my hand as the train approached, the sound a deep, certain rumble. Karen carried our bags, her scarf fluttering like a flag in the wind. The doors slid open with a sigh. I turned to look back at the city one last time, the domes, the rooftops, the thousands of windows catching fire in the setting sun. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt invited. Ellie tugged my sleeve. Where are we going next, Mrs. Martha? I smiled. Everywhere, I said. We have so many worlds to see. As the train pulled away, the reflection in the window showed 3 faces, one wrinkled with wisdom, one marked with forgiveness, one just beginning. 3 generations, side by side, heading east toward the light. The sun broke over the tracks, blinding and beautiful. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from the past. I was moving toward the morning. Ellie leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a moment I realized the story didn't end with me. It had only changed hands. And that was my story. Not the story of revenge, really, but of remembering who I was before they told me I was nothing. People think justice always comes with noise, police sirens, slammed doors, the sound of handcuffs. But real justice? It's quiet. It's the peace that comes when you finally sleep through the night, knowing you didn't lose yourself trying to keep someone else warm. If you've listened all the way here, thank you. Truly. These stories, they aren't just mine. They belong to every woman who has ever been underestimated, silenced, or left behind, and still found a way to rise again. If you've ever carried silence the way I did, you know stories like this are not endings, they're lanterns. So, if you believe that wisdom doesn't fade, it just gets quieter, then stay with me. Hit subscribe to Grandma True Stories so you don't miss the next time an old woman like me decides it's time to tell the truth out loud. Because revenge has no expiration date. And when a grandma speaks, the world listens.